The Brest Fortress is a symbol of the heroism and resilience of Soviet defenders during the Great Patriotic War. Its defense, which began on June 22, 1941, in the very first hours of Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, became one of the earliest and most striking chapters in the struggle for the motherland. The Brest Fortress was located in the city of Brest, today Brest, Belarus, an important strategic point on the western borders of the USSR. At the beginning of the war, the garrison numbered about 9,000 people, including soldiers, civilians, and gendarmes. However, on the eve of the weekend, many had received leave to go into the city. On duty remained little more than 3,500 people. The fortress itself was a system of fortifications built according to the traditional Russian design, with barracks, bunkers, moats, and walls. Today, we will go back to the morning of June 22, 1941, the most tragic moment at the start of the Great Patriotic War. The Brest Fortress became one of the first targets of the German offensive. Early in the morning, at 4 a.m., when most people were still asleep, the fortress was struck by a massive artillery bombardment. The Germans concentrated significant forces. Heavy artillery, mortars, and aircraft shelled the barracks, residential quarters, and fortifications. The strike was calculated to achieve maximum surprise, and it succeeded. Historians note that in the first minutes, the fortress literally shook from the relentless explosions. Shells burst in the barracks, on parade grounds, and in casemates. Thick clouds of smoke, fires, and debris filled the inner courtyards. People rushed out of their bedrooms and apartments in panic, many not even fully dressed. For peacetime, it was a complete shock. It is important to remember, on the eve of the war, life in the fortress was completely ordinary. The garrison was carrying out its regular duties. Officers lived with their families, children played in the courtyards, women did household chores. No one expected that on that very night they would come face to face with war. Although the Soviet Union did have intelligence about a possible attack, the exact date and time remained unknown. That's why the night of June 22 passed peacefully. Soldiers were resting, officers were at home with their families. Some households were even preparing for Sunday, planning a trip into the city. For all these people, the first artillery salvo was literally a bolt from the blue. Just imagine, only the evening before, people were having dinner, discussing daily matters, planning the next day. And suddenly, the walls of their homes collapse. Fire and screams fill the fortress. The destruction was colossal. Already in the first minutes, barracks, warehouses, and residential houses were obliterated. Among the first victims were many civilians, the wives and children of commanders who were in the fortress at that moment. They suffered no less than the soldiers. Among the troops, the losses were also terrible. Some died right in their beds, not even having time to grab their weapons. Others were crushed under collapsing buildings. The duty units stationed at posts were also hit by heavy fire and often perished without even being able to raise the alarm. Thus, the first minutes of the war became for the Brest Fortress a time of chaos, devastation, and immense casualties. Everything that just the day before had been peaceful life, family, service, plans for the future, in an instant turned into the blazing hell of war. After the massive artillery and airstrikes, the fortress was literally cut into pieces. Communication lines were destroyed, command structures disorganized. Radio and telephone communications were severed in the first hours. The German plan was built precisely on this, to deprive the garrison of command and crush it piece by piece. That is why a single command center capable of coordinating the defense never emerged inside the fortress. Each group of fighters was left to fend for itself. Commanders of separate units acted according to the situation.
gathering surviving soldiers and officers around them, occupying the most favorable positions, and preparing to repel enemy attacks. This created a picture of fragmented yet extremely resilient resistance. Instead of one continuous front, there were numerous local pockets of fighting. Each courtyard, casemate, or barracks could become a fortress within the fortress. For the Germans, this was an unpleasant surprise. They had expected a swift capture of Brest, but instead encountered ferocious battles in every corner. The Brest Fortress had a complex structure. It was not a single building, but an entire system of fortifications, bastions, islands, and forts. The eastern and western islands, these areas became the scene of fierce battles. The Germans repeatedly stormed the islands using tanks, artillery, and flamethrowers. But the defenders, sheltering in underground facilities and the ruins of buildings, stubbornly held their ground. Every meter of land cost the enemy heavy losses. The northern island. Here the defenders managed to establish an especially strong line of resistance. The Germans were forced to fight for several days to suppress the defense, which delayed their advance into Soviet territory. The Cobrin fortification. Here, losses were enormous, but the defenders continued to hold their positions despite being completely encircled. The Tiraspol fortification. Hard battles unfolded here too. The Germans used everything at their disposal, from artillery to aircraft, but the defenders bravely repelled the attacks, often even launching counterattacks.
Thus, each fortified area became an independent center of defense, where soldiers and officers fought as best they could, without hope of support from outside. The feat of Major Pyotr Gavrilov. By June 22, 1941, Major Gavrilov commanded elements of the 44th Rifle Regiment. On the night before the attack, he was inside the fortress with his family. At 4 a.m., when German artillery opened fire, Gavrilov immediately assumed command of the nearby units. He gathered the surviving soldiers around him. His group entrenched itself in the Cobrin fortification and began a stubborn defense. From the very first hours of the war, Gavrilov revealed exceptional qualities as a commander. He not only directed the battle, he fought in it himself. Eyewitnesses recalled how he led counterattacks, lifting men by his own example and inspiring them to hold their ground. While other units lost their commanders and fell apart, Gavrilov became the core of a solid center of resistance. He knew full well there was no hope of help from outside, yet he considered it his duty to fight to the end. His task was simple: to delay the enemy as long as possible, to inflict losses, and to embody the spirit of courage. As time passed, the situation grew ever worse. The Germans brought in tanks, artillery, flamethrowers. Food and water ran out. Ammunition was nearly gone. Yet Gavrilov carried on, sustaining the will of his men to resist. Even when only a handful were left alive, he did not cease the fight. His group launched raids to capture ammunition and water, acts of incredible determination. Only a month after the war began, in late July 1941, the exhausted and starving major was finally taken prisoner. The Germans were astonished. A man at the very edge of survival had resisted them for nearly a month after the fortress had ceased to exist as a military stronghold. He was sent to a concentration camp where he endured the war. Against all odds, he survived. After victory, Gavrilov returned to the Soviet Union, continued his service, and later retired from the army. His feat became known to the whole country thanks to post-war research and publications. He was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union only in 1957, long after the war.
The story of Pyotr Gavrilov can be seen as a symbol of the entire garrison. He proved that even in complete isolation, under hunger, thirst, and relentless attacks, a man can stand to the very end. Thanks to men like him, Brest Fortress entered history as a hero fortress. The name of Major Gavrilov still stands as a symbol of courage and devotion to the motherland.
The feat of Captain Ivan Zubachov. At dawn on June 22, 1941, Captain Ivan Zubachov, commander of the 333rd Rifle Battalion of the 84th Rifle Regiment, was stationed in the Tiraspol fortification of Brest Fortress. That very sector came under some of the heaviest blows of German artillery and aviation. Soldiers suffered terrible losses, buildings collapsed, communications were severed. In that chaos, Zubachov revealed himself as a true commander. He quickly gathered the surviving men, assigned positions, and created a strong center of resistance. For people thrust into the hell of sudden war, the presence of a firm and resolute leader meant everything. Though the enemy outnumbered and outgunned them, under Zubachov's command, the Tiraspol fortification became a serious problem for the Germans. Instead of swiftly taking the fortress, they were forced to spend time and strength on its assault, while it was not the only pocket of resistance. Sources note Zubachov's close cooperation with Commissar Yefim Fomin and other officers. Together, they maintained order and discipline. Fomin inspired the men with words, while Zubachov gave the example of cool-headed military leadership. Their tandem proved vital for the survival of the defenders. By the middle of the first week, the defenders' situation was desperate. Food and water were scarce, bombardments unending, enemy numbers overwhelming. Yet Zubachov held his ground. Survivors recalled that he refused to even consider breaking out. In his mind, the duty of the defenders was to stand to the last. Eventually, after exhausting battles, when all strength was gone, Zubachov was taken prisoner along with other defenders. To the Germans, he was a valuable prize, a living commander whose resistance had earned both their respect and their hatred. His fate in captivity was tragic. He perished in a Nazi camp, never living to see victory. Though he never returned, his name endures in history, preserved through the memories of comrades and later research. His feat stands as an example of command endurance, the ability to unite people under inhuman conditions, to preserve faith in the necessity of the fight, and to do all that was possible so his men fought with dignity. The feat of Ivan Zubachov is a reminder that heroism is not only in single dramatic deeds, but in the quiet, relentless burden of responsibility, in the will to lead and to refuse to retreat even when the situation seems hopeless. His name stands alongside Pyotr Gavrilov and Yefim Fomin, the three commanders whose will and courage made Brest Fortress an eternal symbol of the unbreakable spirit of the Soviet people.
Yefim Moiseyevich Fomin, political commissar. Fomin was a man of immense responsibility. His mission was to sustain the spirit of the soldiers, to explain to them the meaning of what was happening and the necessity of the fight. In moments when the situation seemed hopeless, it was his words that gave men the strength to endure. He walked among the positions, spoke to the soldiers, urged them never to surrender, and reminded them of their duty to the motherland. Fomin skillfully combined moral leadership with organizational work. Together with Captain Ivan Zubachov and Major Pyotr Povrilov, They coordinated the defense of separate strongpoints. Their unity became the heart of resistance. Foreman understood that victory in the conventional sense was impossible, but he saw the task differently: to delay the enemy, to tie down his forces, and to show an example of resilience. Witnesses recalled that he himself often joined firefights, shared the soldiers' last scraps of food and water, and encouraged them by his presence. Beside him, men felt that their struggle still had meaning. As commissar and senior in rank among the commanders, Foreman bore a special responsibility. At a time when the Red Army's higher command could no longer direct the fortress, he assumed the role of both moral and practical leader. His fate was tragic. When the Germans finally broke into the fortress and encircled the last pockets of resistance, Foreman was captured. The enemy knew exactly who he was: a commissar, a communist, and a Jew. For the Nazis, that meant 3 death sentences in one. He was not sent to a prisoner of war camp. He was executed immediately after capture. The execution was intended as a warning, a way to break the spirit of the defenders by killing their leader. But the effect was the opposite. Foreman's name became a symbol of sacrifice and courage. The deeds of these commanders cannot be separated from the collective heroism of Brest's defenders. Thousands of nameless soldiers and officers, along with women and children, endured the inhuman trial. Without water, without food, without medical care, they fought on, often to their last cartridge. The Germans had expected an easy victory. They believed the fortress would fall in mere hours. Instead, resistance lasted for weeks. Every day of delay cost the enemy time and strength and chipped away at their confidence. The defense of Brest Fortress showed the entire country that the Red Army could and would fight to the very end. From the outset, it was clear that the garrison could not hold out indefinitely in total isolation. Attempts to break out were made again and again. Under cover of night, groups of soldiers tried to pierce the German cordon and reach Soviet lines. But each attempt was fraught with danger. The fortress was surrounded by a dense ring of machine guns and artillery. Those who tried to escape suffered heavy losses. Yet the very fact of these attempts spoke of the defenders' determination. Many knew they might not succeed, but even in failure, they would draw enemy forces away, giving others more time to resist. Some breakouts did succeed. Small groups managed to reach the Red Army, but most remained inside the fortress, convinced that their duty was to fight there to the end.
Brest Fortress was riddled with underground passages, casemates, and cellars. For the Germans, this came as an unpleasant surprise. Even when they believed a sector was taken, defenders would suddenly emerge from the tunnels, open fire, throw grenades, or launch a counterattack. The tactic of strike and vanish kept the Germans in constant tension. They could never feel safe, even in areas they thought pacified. Short, sudden counterattacks were especially effective. When the enemy broke inside, defenders would surge forward with grenades and bayonets, driving him back before returning to their positions. These actions denied the Germans swift victory, turning the assault into a prolonged, exhausting battle. As the defense dragged on, shortages became unbearable. Storehouses had been destroyed in the first days. Food and water were almost gone. Water was the greatest torment. The summer of 1941 was hot, and the river lay under enemy fire. To reach it was nearly impossible. Defenders gathered rainwater, tapped old wells, even dug pits in the basements to collect moisture. but it was never enough. Ammunition, too, was nearly spent. Every bullet, every grenade was counted. Soldiers fired only when certain. When ammunition ran out, they fought with bayonets, with shovels, with bare hands. Hunger and thirst sapped their strength, yet they stood their ground, itself a feat of endurance. The Germans turned to psychological warfare. Loudspeakers blared calls to surrender, promising life in exchange for weapons. Leaflets were dropped, proclaiming the Red Army defeated, insisting no help would come. But these measures rarely had the intended effect. Many soldiers tore up the leaflets, answered the calls with rifle fire, even sang songs to show the enemy their spirit remained unbroken. Of course, the pressure weighed heavily. Cut off, starving, without hope of relief, many men faced despair. Yet this was precisely where the commissars and commanders proved vital, holding their soldiers back from capitulation, repeating again and again, "We stand to the end, because behind us lies the motherland." The story of Brest Fortress is filled with both collective and individual heroism. The garrison, surrounded and cut off, fought on for weeks when all seemed lost. Each platoon, each handful of men fought their battle to the very end. Testimonies tell of soldiers, dying of thirst, still firing until their last cartridge, then charging forward with bayonets alone. In the cellars, messages were carved into the walls, "I am dying, but I will not surrender." These words became the fortress's eternal symbol. The garrison shrank day by day. From the initial 9,000 on paper, only dozens or hundreds remained by the final weeks, wounded, starving, yet still resisting in isolated pockets. The inscription, "I am dying, but I will not surrender," was not a dramatic gesture. It was a human document, a soldier's testament written at the edge of life. A way to say, "I was here, I fought, my death has meaning." These words became a moral anchor for those still alive in the darkness, while outside, artillery shook the walls. Such inscriptions remain among the most powerful evidence of the defender's will. Along with the memories of survivors and the records of the enemy, they remind us that the garrison did not simply die. They acted, they wrote, they fought, they resisted until the very end. By the final weeks, from 9,000 men, only scattered groups remained. Hunger, thirst, and unrelenting attack had taken their toll. Yet even then, the last survivors remained defiant. On June 22, 1941, the enemy expected the fortress to fall in hours. By evening, they believed it would be theirs. Instead, the battle raged for weeks. In some sectors, resistance lasted into late July. For an army built on the strategy of blitzkrieg, even days of delay were a problem. At Brest, the Wehrmacht was forced to spend precious weeks storming a single fortress. The garrison was isolated. Supply lines were severed within hours. No ammunition, no food, no reinforcements. Yet the defenders held. Every day of defense became an act of heroism. The simple fact that Brest Fortress resisted for nearly a month makes its defense unique. It was not a fleeting clash, but a long, exhausting struggle deep in the enemy's rear. And it left behind not only ruins, but a legend of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will of those who chose to fight to the last. Although the events at Brest were not immediately known to the wider public, rumors of the fortress's resistance began to spread as early as the summer of 1941. For an army retreating under the enemy's advance, this example carried enormous weight. Brest had shown that even under sudden attack and complete isolation, it was possible to fight to the very end. It shattered the myth of the invincibility of the German army and proved that determination could slow and even stop the enemy. Soldiers and commanders who heard of the defenders' heroism took it as a lesson. Every position, every village, every town could and must be held for as long as possible. So great was the delay at the border that both Hitler and Mussolini decided to see with their own eyes what had stopped the so-called invincible sons of the Reich at Brest. A company from Hitler's personal guard was dispatched to secure their visit. And only by August 15th could the German commandant of Brest, Walter von Unruh, assure imperial security that no armed defenders remained in the fortress. The conclusion is simple. Brest Fortress held out longer than entire nations with their armies and their generals. By 1942, as publications about Brest began to appear, the defense entered official Soviet rhetoric. Newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts carried the image of the fortress's defenders, strengthening the belief that the Red Army could endure and ultimately triumph. The defense of Brest Fortress became part of the collective memory, a foundation of the tradition of resilience. It solidified the conviction that even in the most desperate of circumstances, the Soviet soldier must remain faithful to his oath. The duration of Brest's defense, nearly a month under complete isolation, was of both strategic and moral importance. The Germans spent far more time and resources than expected, while the Red Army gained a powerful symbol. Brest proved that even encircled and cut off from supplies, Soviet soldiers could continue to fight to the very end. In 1965, on the 20th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War, Brest Fortress was awarded the honorary title of Hero Fortress. This honor was reserved only for those sites that had demonstrated exceptional courage in defensive battles against the enemy. Brest thus became not only a historical monument, but a national symbol of heroism, pride, and remembrance. Its status as a hero fortress underscored the importance of preserving the memory of its defenders for the entire nation and for future generations. The heroism of Brest's defenders found its reflection in literature, cinema, and public consciousness. Already in the early post-war years, works dedicated to the heroic defense appeared. In literature, the fortress became a symbol of resilience and sacrifice. Writers and poets praised the courage of its soldiers and officers, depicting their fearlessness, their moral strength, and their loyalty to the motherland. Of special value are the memoirs of participants in the battle, which preserve a living memory of those days and allow modern readers to feel the atmosphere of that tragic time.
Cinema, too, captured the events of Brest. Films sought not only to portray the combat itself, but also the human stories, the moral choices, and the psychological pressure endured by the defenders. These works helped shape historical memory, allowing viewers to share in the experience and to respect the heroism of those who fought in the fortress. The memorial complex at Brest Fortress became a vital part of preserving this memory. Its creation began in the post-war years and continued for decades. Today, the complex includes thematic zones, monuments, and sculptures, each rich with symbolic meaning. At its heart stands the Museum of the Defense of Brest Fortress, displaying wartime relics, personal belongings of the defenders, documents, and photographs. Monuments throughout the grounds commemorate episodes of the battle, embodying the courage and sacrifice of the fighters. Among the most solemn places are the graves of the defenders, where commemorations are held every year on Victory Day and on the Day of Remembrance and Sorrow. The culture and commemorative practices surrounding Brest Fortress play a crucial role in fostering patriotism and preserving historical memory. The monument reminds us of the price of freedom and that heroism is found not only on the battlefield, but also in the moral strength to face danger unyielding. Its status as a hero fortress makes it a central site of national memory, a symbol of unity in times of trial. Thus, Brest Fortress remains a living symbol of heroism and resilience. The title of Hero Fortress secured its place in history, while literature, cinema, and its memorial complex continue to pass down the memory of its defenders to future generations, reminding us always of the meaning of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice in the defense of the motherland.